Very good evening to everyone. We all had parted in our last class while we were doing the chapter The Enemy, right? And we had started off already, the chapter has been summarized. We had started off till what Hana and Dr. Sadao had decided. Even though उनका दिल नहीं मान रहा था, they were not that much uh, मतलब कि confident, but yet Dr. Sadao decided to operate upon him. So now the boy, that is the man, is on the operation theatre. Dr. Sadao is in a dilemma, but he has taken this decision to save this boy. Now what happens further is the story. आज हम लोग जो है यहीं से करेंगे. That is what had happened. When they had informed the when they had informed their servants, so the servants were not very happy about the decision, since उनको लगा कि the doctor has the soft corner for people in America, and that is why they are doing it. Otherwise भगवान ने उसके साथ 2 बार किया था. once he was shot and second time उसको रॉक से लगा, तो डॉक्टर उसे क्यों सेव कर रहा है? That was a question of, क्योंकि now ये क्वेश्चन आपके पेपर में आता है, ऐसा क्यों? देखिए बेटा, देयर इज ऑलवेज अ लेवल. आप जिस लेवल से सोचोगे मैं उस लेवल से नहीं सोचूंगी. एक डॉक्टर जिस लेवल से सोचेगा, हम एक पेशेंट एक उस लेवल से नहीं सोचेगा. सो देयर इज ऑलवेज अ लेवल, देयर इज अ डिफरेंस बिटवीन द लेवल्स. नाउ दे वर सर्वेंट्स, दे वर जापानीज, तो उनको तो यही लग रहा था कि भाई वो हमारा दुश्मन है, उसे मार डालो. वाइल डॉक्टर वॉज अ मेडिकल प्रोफेशन, तो उसके दिमाग में था कि हाउ कैन अ डॉक्टर किल अ पर्सन और लेट द पर्सन डाई. बस दिस मैन, he thought there is no reason under heaven why he should live. मतलब ये बार बार ये क्वेश्चन यहाँ पर ये है कि why this is doing, कि वो मन से नहीं कर रहा था, but somewhere his instinct of medicine was not allowing him to take any other step. Unconsciously, this thought made him ruthless and he proceeded swiftly. और ये चीज उसको जो है irritate कर रहा था, और वो जल्दी जल्दी कर रहा था swiftly. In his dream, the man moaned, but the Sadao paid no heed except to mutter at him. मतलब वो जो इंसान था जो कि बीमार था, जो कि बेहोश था, वो उस वक्त में he was moaning, groan, if you like. I am not doing this for my own pleasure. In fact, I do not know why I am doing this. और वो जो है गुस्से में बोल रहा था, दर्द से कराओ, मुझे क्या जा रहा, मुझे तो ये भी नहीं पता मैं तुम्हें क्यों सेव कर रहा हूं. The door opened and there was Hana again. Where is the anesthetic? Sadao motioned with his chin. It is as well that you came back. This fellow is beginning to stir. मतलब वो थोड़ा he is becoming stir, मतलब शांत हो रहा है. She had the bottle and some cotton. उसके हाथ में था. उस जमाने में हमारा आजकल क्या होता है, anesthesia is given in different forms, as I told you. It can be a GA, it can be an SA, it can be through the injections होते हैं, सूंघने वाला भी होता है. उस जमाने most of the time it was only the chloroform. वो अपने मूवी में देखा होगा ना, टप. She had the bottle and some, how shall I do it? Simply saturate the cotton, उसको गीला करो. Hold it near his nostrils. Sadao replied without delaying for one moment the intricate detail of his work. When he breathes badly, move it away a little. उसने कहा कि उसके नाक पे रखो, और जब वो थोड़ा सा तेज तेज सांस लेगा ना, उसे हटा दो. तो he told him the way she should give the anesthesia. She crouched close to the sleeping face of the young American. It was a piteously thin face, she thought, and the lips were twisted. और पतला सा चेहरा, बहुत सूखा हुआ. The man was suffering whether he knew it or not. दर्द उसके चेहरे पर दिख रहा था. The pain was visible on his face. Watching him, she wondered. अब ये पेपर में आया था 2 साल पहले, अभी recently. Watching him, she wondered if the stories they heard sometimes of the sufferings of prisoners were true. They came like flickers of rumor told by word of mouth, always contradicted. In the newspapers, the reports were that wherever the Japanese armies went, the people received them gladly with cries of joy at their liberation. But sometimes she remembered such men as General Takima, वही जो बीमार है, who at home beat his wife cruelly, though no one mentioned it now he had fought so victorious a battle in Manchuria. What is the meaning of all these words? Means जब वो उसके चेहरे को देखती है, उसके दर्द को देखती है, उस अमेरिकन के दर्द को देखती है, बेटा इन योर क्वेश्चन सर्टन टाइम्स यू मे नॉट बी हैविंग द डायरेक्टली अमेरिकन, और वो आपके में आ सकता है POW इंस्टेड ऑफ अमेरिकन, इंस्टेड ऑफ आपके आ सकता है POW. POW मतलब प्रिजनर ऑफ वॉर. इट्स इन द पेपर ओनली. तो जब भी वो POW को देखते हैं ना, तो उसके दिमाग में एक बात आती है कि हम कितनी बार हम पढ़ते हैं दैट इट इज नॉट ओनली दैट वी फाइट द बैटल, कई बार जो प्रिजनर्स होते हैं उनके साथ बुरा सलूक होता है. तो क्या ये सच है? और कई बार उसने ये भी पढ़ा है कि मतलब कि जो जापानीज आर्मीज हैं, दे हैव ऑलवेज हेल्प्ड पीपल एंड दे आर वेलकम्ड. बट ऑन द अदर हैंड उसी जापानीज आर्मी में जनरल टकीमा जैसे लोग भी हैं जो अपनी वाइफ को घर में तो कूट कूट के मारते हैं, लेकिन बाहर मंचूरिया जैसे बैटल में जाकर, मंचूरिया आपका मंचूरियन नहीं है, बैटल ऑफ मंचूरिया में वो इतने विक्टोरियसली लड़ते हैं. If a man like that could be so cruel to a woman in his power, would not be cruel to one like this for instance, जो अपनी वाइफ के साथ इतना बुरा सलूक कर सकता है, क्या वो प्रिजनर्स के साथ नहीं कर सकता है? मीन्स कहीं ना कहीं she feels bad for that man, for the POW. कहीं ना कहीं she feels pity for the POW. She hoped anxiously that this young man had not been tortured. It was at this moment she observed deep red scars on his neck under his ear. उसने यहाँ पर देखा स्कार थे और उसको लगा इस बेचारे के साथ भी बुरा हुआ होगा. देखिए बच्चा, यहाँ पर क्या है कि एनिमिटी हमारी होती है, बट टॉर्चर, दो स्कार्स, ये पेपर में आया था, ये आया था पेपर में. शी मर्मर्ड लिफ्टिंग हर आइज टू सदाओ. उसे सदाओ की तरफ देख के बोला देखो उसके, बट सदाओ डिड नॉट आंसर. At this moment he felt the tip of his instrument strike against something hard. वो अपने ही ऑपरेशन, अपनी सर्जरी में he was engrossed. He could hear that उसको आवाज जो है ना आ रही थी. Dangerously near the kidney. चोट जो है, जो गोली थी वो किडनी के पास लगी थी. As you know, you all are pretty well, very intelligent. किडनी कहाँ होती है आपकी? Oh, that you know. Sorry. All thought left him. He felt only the purest pleasure. Now यहाँ पर what is the purest pleasure? It's the pleasure of a doctor performing the surgery. Each word of this chapter has some meaning and each line has been there in the papers one or the other time in the RTC's form. He probed मतलब कि to find out. He probed with his fingers delicately, familiar with every atom of this human body. Atom मतलब anatomy. वो एक एक चीज को ध्यान से देख रहा था. His old American professor of anatomy had seen to that knowledge. उसने क्या बोला था? Ignorance of the human body is surgeon's cardinal sin. मतलब जिसको कभी आप माफ नहीं कर सकते. अगर आप ignorant हो, if you don't know about the body part, if you don't know about the anatomy of, तो then a surgeon cannot perform. To operate without as complete knowledge of the body as if you have had made it, anything less than that is murder. मतलब आपको उस बॉडी की ऐसी नॉलेज होनी चाहिए जैसे आपने ही उस बॉडी को बनाया हो. मीन्स ईच एंड एवरी इंट्रिकेट डिटेल, कहाँ पे क्या है. अदरवाइज एक छोटी सी भी गलती जो है, that is not a mistake, that's a murder. It's not a carelessness. It is not carelessness, it is directly murder. It is not quite at the kidney, my friend. ये पेपर में 2014 या 15 में आया था कि he has addressed the POW as friend. तो क्या वो उसको सचमुच में अपना दोस्त मान रहा है? क्या उसके लिए उसके दिल में सॉफ्ट कॉर्नर आ गया है? तो नो. That was his usual way of talking. You might have seen everyone has a usual way of talking. Like mine is, very common. मैं किसी से ना बेटा बेटा करके ही बात करती हूँ. तो I don't, मतलब because that has been a routine. Sometimes we realize कि हम किससे बात कर रहे हैं, but it happens because as a teacher for the past so many years I'm only engrossed with my students. तो स्टूडेंट बड़ा हो छोटा हो मैं बच्चा बेटा बोल देती हूँ. It was his habit to murmur to the patient when he forgot himself in an operation. My friends, he always called his patients out no dead, forgetting that this was his enemy. मतलब यहाँ पर भी he was not derelicting his duty. आपके पेपर का जो क्वेश्चन था कि was he derelicting his duty, क्या वो अपनी ड्यूटी से गद्दारी कर रहा था? तो नहीं, ये उसका यूजुअल वे था. This was a question in the boards. I don't remember the year, it was 14 or 15. It was a question कि was he derelicting his duty? तो no, वो अपनी ड्यूटी से गद्दारी नहीं कर रहा है. It is his way of speaking. Guts, they got my guts. Sadao, तभी उसने शो. Hush. The man sank again into silence. So profound means deep that Sadao took up his wrist, hating the touch of it. मतलब वो एकदम ठंडा था. He was sinking. और तब उसको पसंद तो नहीं था, लेकिन उसने उसके पल्स को देखा. Yes, there was still a pulse. So faint, so feeble, but enough if he wanted the man to live to give hope. कम था पल्स, लेकिन इतना feeble मतलब very less, faint. But अगर वो चाहता है तो वो उसको बचा लेगा. But certainly I do not want this man to live. But मैं क्यों चाहता हूँ? No more anesthetic. उसने कहा अब मत दो. He turned as swiftly as though he had never paused, and from his medicines he chose a small vial. From it filled a hypodermic, thrust it into the patient's left arm. Then putting down the needle, he took the man's wrist again. The pulse under his finger fluttered once, twice, and then grew stronger. फिर उसने क्या किया? उसने एक इंजेक्शन का वायल लिया, फटाफट से उसने इंजेक्शन को इंजेक्ट किया, मतलब कि निकाला, उसके आर्म्स में इंजेक्ट किया. फिर उसके पल्स को चेक किया, एक बार दो बार थोड़ा फड़फड़ाया, फिर उसके बाद उसका जो पल्स था वो वापस आ गया. फ्रॉम इट फिल्ड अ हाइपोडर्मिक, मतलब जो आपका इंट्रा मसल्स होते हैं, तो उसको उसने से निकाल के फिल किया. दिस मैन विल लिव इन स्पाइट ऑफ ऑल. उसने कहा कुछ भी हो जाए ये बच जाएगा. The young man woke, so weak, his blue eyes so terrified when he perceived where he was. When मतलब जब उसको समझ आया कि वो एक जापानीज के घर में था तो वो डर गया. That Hannah felt compelled to apologize. She herself served him, for none of the servants would enter the room. When she came in the first time, she saw him summon his small strength to be prepared for some fearful thing. मतलब वो डरा हुआ था, उसको लगा कि अब ये जो दोनों हैं मेरे साथ कुछ गलत करेंगे. उसने उसे बोला डोंट बी अफ्रेड. तब उसने पूछा हाउ कम यू स्पीक इंग्लिश. उसने जवाब दिया आई वॉज अ लॉन्ग टाइम इन अमेरिका. आई वॉज अ लॉन्ग टाइम मतलब आई लिव्ड इन अमेरिका फॉर अ लॉन्ग टाइम. She saw that he wanted to reply to that, but he could not. So she knelt and fed him gently from the porcelain spoon. He ate unwillingly, but still he ate. वो कुछ बोलना चाहता था, उसमें हिम्मत नहीं थी. फिर उसने पोर्सलिन होता है वो चाइनीज जो चाइना बर्तन होते हैं जैसे हमारे कप एंड सॉसर होते हैं, पोर्सलिन, उसने उसे खिलाया, उसे खाया. नाउ यू विल बी स्ट्रॉन्ग. She said, not liking him and yet moved to comfort him. He did not answer. When Sadao came in third day after the operation, he found the young man sitting up, his face bloodless with effort. मतलब वो बैठा हुआ था. He forced, lie down. Do you want to die? बैठे क्यों हो? मरना है क्या? So, लेटो. He forced the man down gently and strongly and examined the wound. You may kill yourself if you do this sort of thing. मतलब कि it's dangerous अगर तुम इसे. What are you going to do with me? Are you going to hand me over? आप मुझे पुलिस को दे दोगे? उसने पूछा. For a moment, Sadao did not answer. He finished his examination, then pulled the silk quilt over the man. I do not know myself what I shall do with you. I ought, of course, to give you to the police. You are a prisoner of war. No, do not tell me anything. Do not even tell me your name unless I ask it. उसने कहा मुझे नहीं पता, वैसे तो मुझे तुम्हें पुलिस में ही देना चाहिए, मुझसे कोई बात मत करना, इवन अपना नाम भी मत बताना. They looked at each other for a moment and then the young man closed his eyes, turned his face to the wall. Okay. अब वो सो गया. Outside the door, Hana was waiting for Sadao. He saw at once she was in trouble. उसने देखा कि वो लोग जो है वो सोने लगे, मतलब वो जो है मतलब कि वहां पे कुछ प्रॉब्लम थी, मतलब उसके उसके चेहरे से पता लग रहा था कि देयर वाज सम प्रॉब्लम. Sadao, Yumi tells me that the servants feel they cannot stay if we hide this man here anymore. She tells me that they are saying you and I were so long in America that we have forgotten to think of our own country first. They think we like Americans. ये मैंने आपको बताया था the reason. अब मैंने आपको बताया था कि what did the servants think? The servants thought that they had developed a soft corner for the Americans. Sorry, for this American, for this POW. It is not true. Americans are our enemies, but I have not been trained to let a man die if I can help it. This is where the theme comes. उसने कहा कि ये सच नहीं है. But as a doctor, I cannot kill a person. I have been trained to save people. The servants cannot understand. No. Neither seemed able to say more, and somehow the household dragged on. The servants grew more watchful. Their courtesy was as careful as ever, but their eyes were cold upon the pair to whom they were hired. What is the meaning? अब घर में एक अजीब सी शांति थी. सर्वेंट बड़े ध्यान से देख रहे होते थे कि ये लोग क्या कर रहे हैं. उन्हें ऐसा लग रहा था कि ये भी गद्दार हो गए हैं. बट देयर आईज वर कोल्ड अपॉन, मतलब दे डिड नॉट, दे वर इनडिफरेंट. वो वैसे कॉर्डियल रिलेशंस नहीं था. इट इज क्लियर व्हाट आवर मास्टर ऑट टू डू, said the old gardener. He had worked with flowers all his life and had been a specialist too in moss. काई जो होती है, ग्रीन कलर की जो होती है. For Sadao's father, he had made one of the finest moss gardens in Japan, sweeping the bright green carpet constantly so that not a leaf or pine needle marred the velvet of its surface. उसने इतना सुंदर बनाया था कि कोई भी चीज़ उसको खराब नहीं कर सकती थी. मतलब जो गार्डनर था वो उनके पापा के टाइम से काम कर रहा था. My old master's son knows very well what he ought to do. उसने बुश को निकालते हुए बोला. When the man was so near death, why did he not let him bleed? उसने उसे क्यों नहीं मरने दिया? That young master is so proud of his skill to save lives that he saves anyone. और जो कुक था उसने बड़े arrogantly बोला, उसको ना अपने पे बहुत घमंड है. She split a fowl's neck skillfully, held a fluttering bird, and let its blood flow into the roots of a wistaria vine. वो जो है किसी फाउल को, मतलब कि बर्ड को काट रही थी टू मेक फूड, तो उसका जो खून था वो नीचे बहा रही थी, क्योंकि अकॉर्डिंग टू द गार्डनर ब्लड आपका बेस्ट फर्टिलाइजर होता है, तो वो उसको काट रही थी. It is the children of whom we must think, Yumi sadly said. What will be their fate if their father is condemned as a traitor? सोचो, हमारा तो कुछ नहीं, लेकिन उनको, बट बच्चे के साथ में क्या होगा जब उसके पापा को जेल हो जाएगी. So there were three people: the gardener, the cook, and Yumi. This was there in the paper. They did not try to hide what they said from the ears of Hannah as she stood arranging the day's flower in the veranda nearby, and she knew they spoke on purpose that she. उन्होंने जानबूझकर जोर जोर से बोला जिससे हाना को सुनाई दे. That they were right, she knew too in most of her being, but there was another part which she herself could not understand. It was not sentimental liking of prisoner. She had come to think of him as a prisoner. She had not liked him even yesterday when he had said in an impulsive way, "Anyway, let me tell you, my name is Tom." वो उसको इसलिए नहीं पसंद कर रही थी, जबकि उसने कल जो है इम्पल्सिवली अपना नाम भी बताया था. शी हैड ओनली बोर्ड हर लिटिल डिस्टेंस बो. शी सॉ हर्ट इन हिज आईज बट शी डिड नॉट विश टू ऑसेज इट. इंडीड ही वॉज अ ग्रेट ट्रबल. वो किसी भी तरीके से शी डिड नॉट वांट टू एनकरेज दैट मैन. उसका रहना उसके लिए भी मुसीबत था. एज फॉर सदाओ, every day he examined the wound carefully. The last stitches had been pulled out this morning, and the young man would, in a fortnight, be nearly as well as before. Sadao went back to his office and carefully typed a letter to the chief of police reporting the whole matter. On 21st day of February, an escaped prisoner was washed away on the shore in front of my house. So far, he typed, and then he opened a secret drawer and put the unfinished report. उसने तो अपना जो कन्फेशन था वो भी लिख दिया था, बट उसने अभी पूरा नहीं किया था, इसलिए उसने ड्रॉ में डाल दिया. On the seventh day, one of the most repeated question in the boats. On the seventh day, two things happened. आपके पेपर में यही आता है और कई बार डायरेक्टली आता है. What happened? In the morning, the servants left together, their belongings tied in large square cotton kerchief. When Hannah got up in the morning, nothing was done. The house was not clean, the food was not prepared, and she knew what it meant. सुबह उसने देखा कि सब लोग जाने के लिए तैयार थे और कोई काम नहीं हुआ था. She was dismayed and even terrified. वो दुखी भी थी, disappointed भी थी और डरी भी हुई थी. But her pride as a mistress would not allow her to show it. वो अपना डर दिखाना नहीं चाहती थी. Instead, she inclined her head gracefully when they appeared before her, and she paid them off and thanked them for all they had done for her. उसने उल्टा बड़े तमीज से उनको पैसा दिया और थैंक्स कहा. They were crying, but she did not. The cook and the gardener had served Sadao since he was a little boy in his father's house. And Yumi, वो बच्चों के लिए थी. She was so grieving that she had gone. She ran back to Hannah. वो वापस आई और हाना से उसने जो है गले मिली. If the baby misses me too much, send for me. I'm going to my own house. You know where it is. मैं अपने घर जा रही हूँ, बुला लेना. Thank you. But she told herself she would not send for Yumi. Ego था उसमें. She made the breakfast and Sadao helped with the children. Neither of them spoke of the servants beyond the fact that they were gone. उन्होंने उस बारे में कोई डिस्कशन नहीं किया. But after Hannah had taken morning food to the prisoner, she came back to Sadao. Why is it we cannot see clearly what we ought to do? Even the servants see more clearly than we do. Why are we different from other Japanese? Sadao did not answer, but a little later he went into the room where the prisoner was and said briskly, "Today you may get on your feet. I want you to stay only for 5 minutes a day time. Tomorrow you may try twice as long. It would be well that you get back to your strength as quickly as possible. उसने कहा आज तुम 5 मिनट के लिए खड़े हो, कल 10 मिनट के लिए, और जितनी जल्दी तुम अपने पैरों पे खड़े हो better. He saw the flicker of terror on the young face that was still very. अब ये वाला जो है इसका मतलब ये था कि वो नहीं चाहता था कि वो वहां से जाए. And the reason is he was safe in this area. Evidently, he was determined to say more. I feel I ought to thank you, doctor, for having seen. Don't thank me too early. He saw the flicker of terror, terror as unmistakable as an animal's. The scar on his neck were crimson for a moment. वो इतना डरा कि उसके जो चोट लगी हुई जो स्कार थे वो लाल होने लग गए. Those scars, what were they? उसने पूछा नहीं. In the afternoon, सुबह तो नौकर लोग चले गए. In the afternoon, the second thing happened. Hannah working hard on unaccustomed labor. What is the meaning of unaccustomed labor? मतलब she was not used to do the household work. But उस दिन उसे करना पड़ रहा था. Saw a messenger come to the door in official uniform. मतलब police dress में. Her hands went weak and she could not draw her breath. The servants must have told already. She ran to Sadao, gasping, unable to utter a word. But by then the messenger had simply followed her through the garden and there he stood. She pointed at him helplessly. भागते हुए आई और उसने कहा देखो. Sadao looked up from his book. He was in his office, the other partition of which was thrown open to the garden for the southern sunshine. What is it? फिर उसने देखा कि वहां पर मैसेंजर खड़ा है. What is it? उसने पूछा तो उसने बोला you are to come to that palace. The old general is in pain again. उसने कहा कि जनरल को दर्द हो रहा है और हाना ने बोला बस. तो मैसेंजर ने बोला बस. Is it not enough? Indeed it is. I am very sorry. उसने कहा बस सिर्फ दर्द हो रहा है. When Sadao came to say goodbye, she was in the kitchen but doing nothing. The children were asleep and she sat merely resting for a moment, more exhausted from her fright than her work. काम से ज्यादा डर ने उसको जो है डरा रखा था. I thought they had come to arrest you. He gazed down into her anxious eyes. I must get rid of this man for your sake. Somehow I must get rid of. मुझे तुम्हारे लिए इस आदमी से पीछा छुड़वाना पड़ेगा. Now he went to the general, of course, और उसने वहां पर उसने सारी बातें बता दी. I understand fully, but this is because I once took a degree in Princeton, so few Japanese have. I care nothing for the man, Excellency, but having operated on him with such success, yes, it only makes me feel you more indispensable to me. Evidently, you can save anyone. You are so skilled. You say you think I can stand one more such an attack as I had today. अब वो जो जनरल था उसको अपने ही दर्द में था. वो सुनना ही नहीं चाहता था कि डॉक्टर क्या बोल रहा, लेकिन हाँ उसको काट भी नहीं सकता था. तो उसने कहा हाँ मैं जानता हूँ तुम किसी को भी बचा सकते हो, बट अगर ऐसा दोबारा मेरे साथ अटैक हो तो मैं बच जाऊंगा क्या? सदाओ ने कहा नॉट मोर देन वन. That certainly I can allow nothing to happen to you. इसका मतलब ये कि तुम्हें भी कुछ नहीं होना चाहिए. यानी कि indirectly he said, I'll not allow you to be arrested. The general said with anxiety. His long, pale Japanese face became expressionless, which meant he was in deep thought. You cannot be arrested. Suppose you were condemned to death and the next day I have my operation. अगर तुम्हारे को सजा हो गई तो फिर और मेरे को ऑपरेशन की जरूरत पड़ी तो सदाओ ने बोला तो क्या हुआ? देयर आर अदर सर्जन्स, नन आई ट्रस्ट. The best ones have been trained by Germans and would consider the operation successful even if I died. I do not care for their point of view. ये मैंने आपको टाइगर किंग में बताया था कि there are 2 points of view. जर्मन में क्या होता है जब when they have taken out that, उसमें क्या बताते हैं कि they have taken out that prick, लेकिन वो मर गया, बट उनका ऑपरेशन का काम था निकालना वही. बट इन अमेरिका व्हाट हैपेंस इज इट इज अबाउट द होलिस्टिक हीलिंग. I do not care about their point of view. It seems a pity that we cannot better combine the German ruthlessness with the American sentimentality. Then you could turn your prisoner over to execution, yet I could be sure you would not murder me while I was unconscious. He had an unusual sense of humor. अब उसने बहुत humorously बोला कि भाई तुम्हारे अंदर it seems a pity that we cannot better combine, मतलब जो जर्मन के जो रुथलेसनेस है वो एंड अमेरिका का जो सेंटिमेंटल है वो, मतलब उनके जो उनका जो एक काम करने का स्किल और इसको, देन यू कुड टर्न योर प्रिजनर ओवर टू एग्जीक्यूशन, तुम उसको मारने के लिए तैयार हो सकते हो, येट आई कुड बी श्योर यू वुड नॉट मर्डर मी वाइल आई वॉज, फिर भी मैं श्योर हूं तो मुझे कभी भी ऑपरेशन थिएटर पे मरने नहीं दो. He had an as a Japanese, could you not combine these two foreign elements? The element of sentimentality and skillful. Sadao smiled, I'm not quite sure, but for your sake, I'm willing be try. The general shook his head. I had rather not be the test case. मैं मुझ पर टेस्ट मत करना. He felt suddenly weak and overwhelmed with the cares of his life. As an official in times such as these, when repeated victory brought greater responsibility all over the South Pacific, it is very unfortunate that this man should be washed away on your doorstep. उस वक्त वो इतने इरिटेशन में था ड्यू टू पेन, उसने कहा कि पूरी दुनिया में सबको छोड़कर उसको तुम्हारे पास ही आना था. सदाव ने कहा आई फील इट सो माई सेल्फ, मैं भी यही सोचता हूँ. It would be best if he could be quietly killed. This was the solution he gave. Not by you, but by somebody else who does not know him. I have my own private assassins. Suppose I send two of them to your house tonight, or better, any night. Would be more. You need not know anything. It is now warm. What would be more natural than you should leave the outer partition of the white man's room open to the garden while he sleeps? उसने कहा ऐसा मैं करता हूँ कि मेरे अपने प्राइवेट असासिन्स हैं, मीन्स अ पर्सन हु किल्स अदर्स, मैं उन्हें भेजता हूँ, बस पार्टीशन को खोल के रखना. दे वुड किल हिम एज इफ नेचुरली ही हैज डाइड. Certainly it would be very natural. In fact, it is so left open every night. They are very capable assassins. They make no noise and they know the trick of inward bleeding. मतलब बाहर से चोट नहीं है. इफ यू लाइक आई कैन इवन हैव द रिमूव द बॉडी, इवन उसकी कॉप्स को भी उठा के पानी में डाल देंगे. सदाओ कंसिडर्ड दैट परहैप्स वुड बी बेस्ट. जब उसने हाना के बारे में सोचा, नौकरों के बारे में सोचा, उसको लगा कि बेटर कि उसको मार दिया जाए एंड ही गेट्स रिड ऑफ दैट मैन. He left the general's presence then and went home thinking over the plan. As a doctor, he was not having the courage to kill that man, but at the same time, as a Japanese, he was not willing to keep him. अब वो सोचता रहा कि in this way the whole thing would be taken. He would tell Hana nothing since she would be timid at the idea of assassins in the house, and certainly such persons were essential in an absolute state such as Japan was. ऐसे लोग प्राइवेट assassins का होना इन दी, मतलब हर एक जगहों पे मिलिट्री में अपने आपके जो है यू हैव द स्पाइज द प्राइवेट assassins, बट हाना शायद नहीं समझ पाएगी. बट बेस्ट, हाउ एल्स कुड रूलर्स डील विद दोज opposed him? He refused to allow anything but reason to be the atmosphere of his mind as he went into the room where the American was in bed. But as he opened the door, to his surprise, he found the young man out of bed and preparing to go into the garden. What is this? Who gave you permission to leave your room? अब टॉम भी थोड़ा खुश होके बोला, I'm not used for waiting for permission. I felt pretty good again, but will the muscles on this side feel stiff? क्योंकि उसके किडनी के पास लगा था. तो is it so? अब एकदम से डॉक्टर जो है, बिकॉज वो डॉक्टर है, तो ही फॉरगॉट ऑल एल्स. उसके दिमाग में वो सारी चीज़ें चली गई कि आज मैंने गुंडे बुलवाए इसको मरवाने के लिए, उसके दिमाग में वही डॉक्टर वाला इंस्टिंक्ट आ गया. Now I thought I had provided against. He lifted the edge of the man's shirt, gazed at the healing scar. Massage may do it if exercise does not. थोड़ी सी मालिश कर. It won't bother me much. His young face was gaunt under the stubbly blonde beard, Doctor, I've got something I want to say to you. If I had not met a Jap like you, well, I would have not been alive today. He gave his gratitude once again. Sadao bowed, but he could not speak. Sure, I know that. His big, thin hands gripping a chair were white at the knuckles. I guess if all the Japs were like you, there wouldn't have been a war. Perhaps, and now I think you had better go back to bed. उसने कहा हाँ ठीक है तुम जाओ. He helped the boy back into bed, bowed good night. Sadao slept badly that night. Time and again he woke thinking he heard the rustling of footsteps, the sound of a twig broken, stone displaced in the garden, noise such as men make white who carry a burden. Who carried a burden मतलब जो लाश को वहां से उठा के लेकर जा रहे हैं, तो जो जैसी शोर आती है, मतलब वो ऐसे एनविसेज कर रहा था. एक्चुअली ऐसा कुछ हुआ नहीं था. ही वॉज जस्ट एनविसेजिंग, ही वॉज ओनली इमेजिनिंग. उसे ऐसा लग रहा था. The next morning, he made the excuse to go fast into the guest room. If the American were gone, he then could simply tell Hannah that so the general had directed. But when he opened the door, he saw at once there was on the pillow was a shaggy blonde head. He could hear the peaceful breathing of sleep and he closed the door again. जैसा उसने सोचा था कि जनरल ने भेज दिया होगा assassins, को ख़त्म कर दिया होगा, बट एंड में क्या हुआ, वो जब वहाँ पे गया तो दैट मैन, दैट POW was sleeping very peacefully. He is asleep. He is almost well to sleep like that. What shall we do with him? I must decide it in a day or two. But certainly he thought the second night, हो सकता कल भूल गए, आज भेजेंगे. There rose a wind that night and he listened to the sounds of bending bows and whistling partitions. आवाज़ें आ रही थी क्योंकि उनका जो घर था वो it was near the beach, so there were noise. Ought we not to go? जब हाना उठी तो उसने कहा तुम मत जाओ वहाँ पे. उसने उसने पूछा ought we not to go and close the man's partition? उसने कहा no, he is able now to do. वहां जाकर कोई जाने की, क्योंकि उसको डर था कि वहां पर assassins होंगे and Hannah would be terrified. But the next morning the American was still there. Then the third night must be the night. The wind changed to quite rain and the garden was full of the sound of dripping eaves and running springs. बारिश हो रही थी, पानी की बहाव की आवाज आ रही थी. He slept better. But he woke at the sound of a crash and leaped to his feet. कुछ जोर से आवाज आई. He thought it might be the people. What was that? The baby woke at her voice and began to wail. I must go and see. उसने कहा मैं देख कर आती हूँ. उसने कहा तुम रुको. What's the matter? Don't go, don't go. His terror infected her and she stood breathless. वो उसको बोलने लगा मत जाओ मत जाओ, क्योंकि उसके दिमाग में वही था कि the assassins might be there. There was only silence. Together they crept back into the bed, the baby between them. Yet, when he opened the door of the guest room in the morning, again he was there. He was very gay and had already washed and was now on his feet. मतलब वो बहुत खुश था और अब वो ज़्यादा, he was also feeling better. He had asked for a razor yesterday and had shaved himself and today there was a faint color in his cheek. I'm well. बड़ा खुश हुआ. Sadao drew his kimono round his weary body. He could not, he decided, suddenly go through another night. It was not that he cared for this young man's, no, simply it was not worth the strain. अब उसके दिमाग में he was hatching a plan. He did not want to save that man. Again and again यही theme आपका आता रहेगा कि whether he know, वो बिल्कुल save नहीं करना चाहता था. But at the same time अगर अब वो इसको पुलिस में देगा तो he would be in danger. You are well, he lowered his voice. You are so well, I think if I put my boat on the shore tonight with food and extra clothing in it, you might be able to row to that little island not far from the coast. It is so near the coast that it has not been worth fortifying. Nobody lives on it because in storm it is submerged. But this is not the season of storm. You could live there until you saw a Korean fishing boat pass. They pass quite near the island because the water is many fathoms deep there. उसने कहा हाँ तुम बिल्कुल स्ट्रांग हो और इतने हो कि यहाँ से तुम बोट को रो करते हुए उस आइलैंड में जा सकते हो। मैं तुम्हें कुछ खाने पीने के सामान, कुछ क्लोथिंग दे दूंगा। वहां पर तब तक रहना जब तक कोई बोट आकर तुम्हें बचा ना ले। वैसे नॉर्मली ड्यूरिंग द स्टॉर्म सीजन दैट पर्टिकुलर आइलैंड सबमर्जेस, जैसे हमारे इंदिरा पॉइंट हुआ था सुनामी में। बट राइट नाउ उसने कहा मौसम ठीक है तो कुछ नहीं होगा। द यंग मैन स्टेयर्ड एट हिम स्लोली कॉम्प्रिहेंडिंग डू आई हैव टू, ये पेपर में ये भी आया था that why did not the man ready to leave them, because उस मैन को, उसको टॉम को पता था that POW knew that he was safer in this couple's hand than anyone anywhere else in the world, कहीं और जाएगा तो उसको मार दिया जाएगा। बट दीज पीपल दो दे वर नॉट लाइकिंग हिम, लेकिन फिर भी उन्होंने उसकी लाइफ को बचाया था। तो उसने पूछा डू आई हैव टू, उसने कहा आई थिंक सो, यू अंडरस्टैंड इट इज नॉट हिडन, यू आर हियर। द यंग मैन नॉडेड इन परफेक्ट कॉम्प्रिहेंशन, ओके। Sadao did not see him until evening. As soon as it was dark, he had dragged the stout boat down to the shore. वो एक बोट छोटा सा लेकर आया। He put the food, bottled water, as well as 2 quilts, जो वो लेकर आया था from a pawn shop. Pawn shop होते हैं जहाँ पे आपके second hand मिलता है वैसे। The boat he tied to a post in the water, for the tide was high. There was no moon. He worked without a flashlight. क्योंकि उसे डर था कि समवन माइट सी हिम, इसलिए बिना फ्लैशलाइट के वो काम कर रहा था। देन जब वो घर के अंदर आया तो वो ऐसे आया जैसे वो काम से आया हो। एक्चुअल में ही वाज टोइंग दैट बोट। सो हाना न्यू नथिंग यूमी वाज हियर टुडे, दो शी वाज सो मॉडर्न, स्टिल शी डिड नॉट ईट विद हिम। यूमी क्राइड ओवर द बेबी, शी मिसेस हिम। अब उसमें वो ऐसी वुमेन थी जो अपने हस्बैंड का पूरा, मतलब इवन दो शी वॉज अ मॉडर्न वुमन बट शी वुड नॉट ईट विद हिम। नॉर्मली होता कि फर्स्ट हस्बैंड ईट्स एंड देन ओनली द वाइफ, तो शी फॉलोड द ट्रेडिशन। दिस कम्स व्हेन यू विल बी राइटिंग द कैरेक्टर स्केच ऑफ हाना। द सर्वेंट्स विल कम बैक एज सून एज अ फॉरेनर इज गॉन। तो सदाओ ने उसको थोड़ा सा कंसोल किया कि जब सब ये चले जाएंगे तो वो सब वापस, ये चला जाएगा तो सब वापस आ जाएंगे। ही वेंट बट ही डिड नॉट confide his plan to her, उसने अपने प्लान को उसके साथ शेयर नहीं किया था। He went into the guest room and that night before he went to bed himself and checked carefully the American's temperature, the state of the wound, the heart and pulse. उसने सारे vitals check किए, सब कुछ ठीक था। पल्स थोड़ा irregular था, that was because of excitement. The young man's pale lips were pressed together, his eyes burned, only the scars were red. I realize you are saving my life again. Not at all. It is only inconvenient to have you here in it. आप मेरी लाइफ को फिर से बचा रहे हो। उसने कहा जी नहीं, दिस इज बिकॉज तुम यहाँ पे रहोगे तो हमारे लिए मुसीबत है। He had hesitated a good deal about giving the man a flashlight, but he had decided to give it to him after all. It was a small one, his own, which he used at night when he was called. जब वो इमरजेंसी में जाता था वो टॉर्च अपने साथ ले जाता था। If your food runs out before you catch a boat, signal me 2 flashes at the same instant. The sun drops over the horizon. Do not signal in the darkness or it will be seen. शाम को करना, रात को मत करना, नहीं तो पकड़े जाओगे। If you are all right but still there, signal me once. अगर वहीं हो तो एक बार, कुछ चाहिए तो 2 बार। मतलब उसने कोड वर्ड सिखा दी। You will find fresh fish easy to catch but you must eat them raw, a fire would be seen. और आइलैंड में कुछ भी जलाना वलाना मत, अदरवाइज विल बी कॉट। उसने उसको पूरा इंस्ट्रक्शंस दे दी। He was dressed now in the Japanese clothes which Sadao had given him, and at last moment Sadao wrapped a black cloth about his blonde head, just to save him. Now the young American, without a word, shook Sadao's hand warmly, then walked quite well across the floor, down the step, into the darkness of the garden. Once, twice, Sadao saw his light flash to find his way. रास्ता ढूंढ रहा था, but that would not be the suspected. He waited until from the shore there was one more flash. Then he closed the partition. That night he slept. अब उसने जनरल को, उसको पता था कि जनरल इज कम्प्लीटली इन हिज हैंड, तो उसने जनरल को बोला, वो भाग गया। उसने ये नहीं बोला मैंने भगाया। यू से द मैन एस्केप्ड, द जनरल आस्क्ड फेंटली, क्योंकि उसका तो ऑपरेशन हुआ था। एंड द जनरल वांटेड डॉक्टर सदाउ टू बी विद हिम एट ऑल द कॉस्ट, तो उसे पता था कि इस वक्त वो उसको अरेस्ट नहीं करवाएगा। He had been operated upon a week before, an emergency operation to which Sadao had been called at the night. For 12 hours, Sadao had not been sure the general would live. The gallbladder was much involved. Then the old man Bad began to breathe deeply again and to demand food. Sadao had not been able to ask about the assassins. उस कंडीशन में जब उसको उसे ऑपरेशन करा था तो उसको ही वॉज नॉट हैविंग द ऑडेसिटी कि वो पूछे कि भाई तुमने असैसिन्स क्यों नहीं भेजे। सो फॉर एज ही न्यू दे हैड नेवर कम। द सर्वेंट्स हैड रिटर्न, अब उसके घर में सब कुछ नॉर्मल हो गया था सिंस द मैन हैड गॉन। यूमी हैड क्लीन द गेस्ट रूम थरोली एंड हैड बर्न सल्फर, जिससे कि वो स्मेल चला जाए। नो बडी सेड एनीथिंग, ओनली द गार्डनर वॉज क्रॉस। क्रॉस मतलब यहाँ पर एंग्री। ये वाला जो क्रॉस वर्ड है ना, दिस विल ऑल्सो कम इन योर पोएम, दैट इज अ रोड साइड स्टैंड में आएगा। बिकॉज ही हैड गॉट बिहाइंड विद हिज क्रिसैंथेम, मतलब उसके जो फ्लावर्स थे रेडिश कलर से होते हैं वो खराब हो गए थे। बट आफ्टर अ वीक सदाओ फेल्ट द जनरल वॉज वेल इनफ टू बी स्पोकन अबाउट द प्रिजनर। तब उसने बताया कि वो भाग गया। He coughed, signifying that he had not said all might have said, but was unwilling to disturb the general further. But the old man opened his eyes suddenly. That prisoner, did I not promise you I would kill him for you? उसने कहा, सर हाँ बोला तो था आपने। Well, so I did. I was suffering a good deal. The truth is, I thought of nothing but myself. In short, I forgot my promise to you. उसने confess किया that due to his pain, he had forgotten to send the assassins. I wondered, Your Excellency. अब जनरल अपने आप को जस्टिफाई कर रहा है। This comes. It was not lack of patriotism or dereliction of duty. मैंने अपनी ड्यूटी से कोई गद्दारी नहीं की थी, ना ही मैं I was not, मतलब you can't call me as non-patriotic. The matter should come out, you would understand. समझ रहे हो ना तुम? Now, certainly, he suddenly comprehended the general was in palm of his hand and that as a consequence he himself was perfectly safe. ये तो मेरी मुट्ठी में है। पाम मतलब ही वॉज उसकी मुट्ठी में है, क्योंकि अब जनरल को खुद डर रखा था, क्योंकि डॉक्टर ने तो कन्फेस कर दिया था। He said to, I can swear to your loyalty, excellency, and to your zeal against the enemy. सर मैं जानता हूँ आप अपनी एनिमी को किस तरह ट्रीट करते हो। तो ही वॉज वेरी पोलाइट, बिकॉज जो उसने स्टेप लिया था, आपके पेपर का क्वेश्चन है ये, वॉज द फाइनल सोल्यूशन टेकन बाय डॉक्टर सदाउ द बेस्ट सोल्यूशन। यू आर अ गुड मैन, यू विल बी रिवॉर्डेड। जनरल ने सिर्फ इतना ही बोला कि मैं तुमको रिवॉर्ड दूंगा। बट सदाउ, सर्चिंग द स्पॉट ऑफ ब्लैक इन द ट्विलाइटेड सी दैट नाइट, हैड हिज रिवॉर्ड। ये भी एक बार आया था, आई डोंट नो इट वाज 2014 और 15। व्हाट वाज द रिवॉर्ड, मतलब उसको अपना रिवॉर्ड मिल गया। यहाँ द रिवॉर्ड इज नॉट द फिजिकल रिवॉर्ड विच वॉज टू बी गिवन बाय द जनरल, इट वॉज अ मेंटल पीस, क्योंकि अब उसे वहां पर वो प्रिजनर ऑफ वॉर नजर नहीं आ रहा था। His prisoner was gone safe, doubtless, for he had warned him to wait only for a Korean fishing boat. मतलब अब वहां कोई नहीं था, तो that means he had escaped, इसका मतलब ये भी safe है। He stood for a moment on the veranda, gazing out to the sea from where the young man had come that another night. And into his mind, मतलब उसके दिमाग में वो जो अमेरिका में उसके साथ में जो indifference हुआ था, वो उसको सोचने लगा। The professor at whose house he had met Hannah, a dull man, his wife had been silly, talkative woman. In spite of her wish to be kind, he remembered his old teacher of anatomy, who had been so insistent on mercy with the knife, and then he remembered the face of his fat, slatternly landlady, जो बहुत ही rude थी. he had great difficulty in finding a place to live in America because he was a Japanese. At that period, during the First World War, Second World War, migration was not so easy, and the people used to consider others only as a foreigner. अभी भी रहता है, but now the Americans were full of prejudice, and it had been bitter to live in knowing himself their superior. वो हमेशा अपने आप को superior समझते हैं. How he had despised the ignorant and dirty old woman. Despise मतलब hate. Who had at last consented to house him in her miserable home. मतलब उसको अपनी लैंडलेडी बिल्कुल नहीं पसंद थी, उसका घर बहुत ही गंदा था, बट उसके पास और कोई रास्ता नहीं था. He had once tried to be grateful to her because she had in his last year nursed him through influenza. जब उसको बुखार था तो उसने थोड़ा सा हेल्प किया था. But it was difficult for she was no less repulsive to him in her kindness. But उसने कोई मतलब even though उसने help किया, लेकिन she showed her pride. Now he remembered the youthful haggard face of his prisoner. उसको अपने prisoner का वो चेहरा wounded face उसे नजर आ रहा था जिसमें pain था. White, repulsive, strange. I wonder I could not kill him. मतलब वहां पर when he was living in America, he did not get any kind of kindness. उसको ऐसा कुछ नहीं मिला था. Repulsive मतलब disgusting. वो कहता लेकिन ये जो आदमी था ये भी ऐसा ही था, तो मैंने इसको सेव क्यों किया? When I hated that woman, then why I saved this man? दोनों तो अमेरिकन्स ही थे. और ये वाला जो आपका आंसर है, this is the answer of this question. While hatred against a member of the enemy race is justifiable, especially during wartime, what makes a human being rise above narrow prejudice? तो वहां तो वो एक जापानीज था, एंड यहाँ वो एक डॉक्टर था. So there are two roles which we are. हम लोगों को अगर आपको याद हो, there is the chapter in class 10, Nelson Mandela, and there is one statement given by Nelson Mandela that we as humans have twin objectives, one towards our country and another towards our. यहाँ पर वो he was a doctor, and as a doctor he did not have the courage to kill him. He was a doctor, he was taught to save people. He was not given the training to kill people. So that is how he overcame. Even though कहीं से भी वो उसको पसंद नहीं कर रहा था, he knew that he was a Japanese, but as a doctor he was not able to even kill him. वो उसे मतलब कि वो एक खुद एक मेडिकल प्रोफेशन में था, तो उसके अंदर वो हिम्मत नहीं थी. एट द सेम टाइम जनरल ने उसको सपोर्ट नहीं किया था, चाहे रीजन कुछ भी हो, और इसीलिए उसने जो है वो फाइनल सोल्यूशन निकाला था. ये भी आपके पेपर का 6 क्वेश्चन है. डू यू थिंक द डॉक्टर्स फाइनल सोल्यूशन टू द प्रॉब्लम वाज द बेस्ट पॉसिबल? इसमें ये जितने क्वेश्चंस आपके बैक में है ना, दे हैव कम इन वन और द अदर वे. सो दिस इज द चैप्टर द एनिमी.